Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Leadership Toolkit. It's Wednesday, which means it's time for your definitive leadership podcast. As you know, I have conversations with amazing leaders from all different verticals of business, and today is no exception. Today, I'm connecting with Kimberly Spencer. She's an award-winning high-performance coach and trainer. She's an Amazon best-selling author. She's a TEDx speaker. She's the founder of crownyourself.com. She's the CEO of Communication Queens, and so much more. So I'm very excited to bring Kimberly Spencer on today, and we always dive right into it. Welcome to the show, Kimberly.
Thank you so much for having me, Mike. Like, your intro felt like I was in a movie. I was like, it's bringing me back.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I have a really good voiceover guy, so it's awesome.
I'm married to a voiceover guy, so I was like, that is a quality voiceover.
That's awesome. So thank you again for taking the time to join me today. If you would just take a couple of minutes and, give me that elevator pitch. Tell me about yourself. Tell me a little bit about your background, your leadership background, and then, crown yourself and Communication Queens. And I'm stoked to get into a conversation with you today.
So my first business started at 5. I'm a second generation entrepreneur. I was selling bags of glitter water, split testing price points for 5 cents or $50. Fast forward to, I had to see what the market would bear. Nobody paid $50 for glitter water. And if you're curious as to what that is, that's plastic bags of water with glitter in it. When you pour it on you, you look shiny and shimmery. And so as a second generation entrepreneur, I was very blessed with parents who understood that entrepreneurial hustle and who saw that I had that early on. By 19, I had created my first business, which was as a freelance Pilates instructor to support myself in my career that I wanted at the time, which was as a Hollywood screenwriter, which is why I said, Mike, you brought me back to the screenwriting days. And after I got my first feature film, Bro, produced, distributed, I co-wrote it with the director, Lionsgate picked it up, Netflix picked it up, and I'm there at the premiere going like, here's my big dream at 24. What do I do now? And I wasn't 100% fulfilled, which was just surprising. And so I thought, well, maybe if I just pivot into entrepreneurship. And at the time I was presented with an opportunity to come on as president of an e-commerce, as a consultant as an e-commerce company because of my Pilates background. I saw the product, immediately said, I can sell this. Became the president of that company for 2 years, successfully had a buyout after 2 years and exited 3 weeks before I got married. And then jetted off on my honeymoon with my husband, wondering like, what the heck do I do when I get back? And that was when the idea of like looking at all the passions that I had for really creating holistic success. I had found success in my body. I had found success in a thriving, amazing relationship. I had found success in business and also, challenges and struggles in each of those areas. And I said, how do I combine it? And I'd been a pageant girl in a past life. I was Miss Congeniality. And I leaped off the couch on my honeymoon and I said, crown yourself. And my husband goes, what's that? And I said, that's the name of my company. And he says, what do you do? I said, I don't know. It's something like Marie Forleo. So I had no clarity for the first year and a half in my business, which meant also I had no profitability in my business for that first year and a half. I was dealing with a lot of doubt because I did not see my exit from my e-commerce company as a success. I saw it as I had lost my business that I had spent 2 years building. And I felt like a failure, quite frankly, because I dealt with 3 months of lawyers telling me that I was too young, too incompetent, too all the things because they were trying to lower my price down. I know that now, but back then I had so much doubt and fear about my ability that it took me really a year and a half to kind of push through that. And it wasn't until I discovered I was pregnant that I was like, oh, I got to make some changes. And so that's when we started really doubling down on coaching. I got certified in NLP, timeline therapy, hypnosis to really rework the mindset. And I knew it was my own mindset, but also to provide my clients with a process that could actually really deeply serve them. I've been doing that and then added on certified high performance coaching. And I've been working with visionary leaders since 2016. And then just recently, back in 2020, fast forward, we got stuck in Australia during COVID. And prior to that, for coaching, my primary form of lead generation was live events. And as you know, like that wasn't happening in 2020. Sure. Not only because of COVID, but because of my visa. And so we were there. I'm the primary breadwinner for my family. Like my husband's industry completely shut down in voiceover. And I was like, oh, I've got to figure something out. And that was when I found the power of guest podcasting, generated over $250,000 from guest podcasting and new business revenue. And I was like, I'm onto something. So when I had my second baby, I decided, like any sane person, to start a second business. And now we have both today, still going strong.
That man, what a journey. I don't even know where to start now. I sit here and I get so excited to have conversations just like this with people like you, because you've been on this whole journey. I love some of the things that you said, like, hey, I found all the success, but you hadn't found yourself, right? And you hadn't found clarity. And I want to dive right into that because I sit here and lots of times my audience, I think, staring at the top of my head because I'm writing all these notes down. So a couple of questions I want to touch on, and you mentioned this briefly. You said I didn't see success for the first couple of years in my business because I hadn't found clarity.
Mm-hmm.
And so can you expand on that a little bit? Because I think it's really important for business leaders, for managers. I think this is one of those things that transcends a bunch of different areas of business. Entrepreneurs, we talked a little bit beforehand, solopreneurs. And so can you expand on that statement? I hadn't found success because I hadn't found clarity.
Yeah, so success loves speed, right? And you can't have speed in your decision making if you don't have clarity on what decision is the best next right decision, and on the clarity at what stage in life and business you're in. So I had come from an e-commerce company where I was building and scaling a $250,000 company. We had financial backing. We had gotten it onto all the major, magazines, onto New York Times Billboard Square. Like I had gone from that to like, oh, I'm starting a coaching. I've never done coaching. Like I didn't know what that was. I didn't know how to provide those services. I didn't know, I didn't have a process that I formulated. I just knew I wanted to help people have more holistic success. And it was from that space that I was like, is it like an Instagram account? Is it like actual one-on-one services? And so because I had no clarity on what I was selling at the beginning stages of my business, I didn't have clarity on the offer. And because I didn't have clarity on the offer, it resulted in no sales. And so at the first stage of your business, you have to have clarity on what is it, the thing that you're offering. And when you have that, once you have that, then there are other decisions along the way that you can build on once you start gaining traction and seeing that the market is responding to the clarity that you have around your offer, or the market isn't responding, which then provides you clarity on like how to either pivot the messaging or to pivot the offer to make it more something that your audience needs.
So let me ask you, because I could go two different directions with this. What first I want to know, what was when you started this, you said 2016, what
Mm-hmm.
was the first offer? How did you distill it down to say, this is the offer I'm going to give?
The first offer that I had, because I wanted to build like it as like an online business, which it is, but I thought online business meant like heaps and heaps of funnels and all the products online, and
Sure.
you go to the website on the magical button and people just click and pay you
You got to
all
have a
throughout the night.
course.
Gotta have a course. And so my first offer was based on my Pilates business, and it was a Pilates instruction book, which
Okay.
no one wanted because this was actually 2015, because it was
Okay.
2016 when I actually started making money in coaching. It was 2015 because in 2015 there was YouTube. Like, who's buying a PDF ebook about Pilates instruction? But I wanted to have something. And so I was trying things, but honestly, the biggest thing that I didn't have clarity on was who I was as a business owner and my own identity as a leader. I didn't have clarity on my values because during the time that I was president of this e-com company and partner with my business partner, I had stripped away parts of my own self, my authenticity, my sparkle. I'm obviously very colorful and like there's
I
a
love
lot
the
of
sparkle.
glitter and crowns involved with who I am, but I had dulled all that down to be a quote unquote professional business person. And because I had lost my self-expression and my authenticity, I didn't have clarity on who I was as a business owner starting from scratch again. And that was the greatest piece that I needed clarity on, was my own identity, before I even had clarity on what my offer was.
I love that statement where when you're talking about all the sparkle and stuff. So I have a daughter that's a competitive gymnast. So we're all about some sequins and some
Oh, yeah.
bedazzled, you know, bedazzled items, if you will. So I really do like those statements when you're saying, hey, I had to find clarity on myself first. So going back there, and especially for, as we're talking to the audience, and I'm going to pause for a second before I get way ahead of myself, because I always get into this and then I'm like 3/4 of the way through and I'm like, oh yeah, I got to introduce this stuff. So a couple of things for the audience, as you're listening to Kimberly and as we're going through this, if you want to connect with her, and what she's talking about is, crownyourself.com. So it's CROWN yourself.com. And so you can connect with her there. And that's the coaching branch, right? That's the coaching and growth portion. And then she also was talking about, she mentioned just briefly talking about her podcast guesting service, and that is communicationqueens.com, spelled just that way. I won't spell the whole thing out, but communication queens, no spaces.com. So you can make sure and connect with Kimberly there. I'll have her linked in a little bit later. As we're talking about, so going back to the questions, as we're talking about finding clarity, and you put yourself back in that 2015, 2016 timeframe. And for anybody because I think it's so important, if you're a manager in business, you have to be clear on what it is that you offer. You have to be clear on the process. You got to be clear on what your team serves, who your business serves, all of those things. And absolutely dovetailing on what Kimberly said here, you have to have clarity with yourself. So putting yourself back there, what are 3 or 4 steps or tactics maybe that you took at the time to help yourself find clarity that you could advise somebody else? Hey, do this if you're trying to find your way back and find yourself clarity for your business.
The number one thing is discover what your values are. And your values are a subconscious processing system. And I know that in many businesses, they have their values plastered up on the wall, and these are our core values. But what do those really mean? Like, I have worked with leaders now for nearly 9 years, and sometimes they'll say, oh, my top value is health. And I'm looking at them like, really? Like, because you keep on skipping your workouts. Like, you say it's health, but is it really? And you will know what your values are when you look at your calendar. You will know what your business's values are when you look at what are the processes you have in place, what are the tasks and projects that you have that are taking priority. Because some people's values, they say it's, courage, but really it's not courage. Some businesses' value currently is urgency. And so it's responding via urgency, not necessarily taking bold, courageous action. So there's a difference in looking and being discerning and really taking the time to understand what are your values personally and what are your values as a business. And for me, with my Crown Yourself business, one of the problems was I was saying our values were ownership and authenticity. And meanwhile, I couldn't have felt farther from that space. I was in a space of blame, complaining. I felt like I was blaming my former business partner for feeling like a failure, even though I didn't realize at the time, a successful exit is a successful exit.
Right.
But I did, because of my own perceptions, I was in a space where I was valuing victimhood more than actually valuing ownership. And I had to actually value ownership and then look at where was I not actually leading myself? And then how was I not embodying the value that I said was my business's value as the leader of my company? Because when you claim that you have values in your business, those I consider to be like your castle walls as far as who's right for your kingdom. Take, for example, Disneyland and Magic Mountain. Those are two very clear kingdoms of theme parks. And they have very two different separate values. Disneyland is much more family-oriented theme park. It's geared so that your toddler and grandma can go to the same park. Like, it is family-focused versus Magic Mountain is thrill-seeking. It doesn't make one bad or the other good. It just means that they're different values. So different people will be attracted to Magic Mountain versus different people will be attracted to being those season pass holders who like every weekend are hitting up Disneyland, which I knew when I lived in California. So being able to understand what are those values that are the ones that are inviting the people into your kingdom, into the kingdom of your business, and what are the ones that also repel? So when I was acting like and valuing victimhood, no wonder I wasn't attracting people into my business, because I wasn't actually taking ownership of how far I'd actually come. I wasn't actually taking ownership of my wins. I wasn't actually taking ownership of my own self-doubts. So ownership it means owning all that encompasses you, both, the fears and the successes and the doubts and the amazing celebrations that you can have. It's ownership of all of it. And once I started actually owning my shiz, we'll just put it that way. Once I started owning all of it, both being the hot shiz and being and the actual like shiz. Once I started owning both pieces, that's when I started attracting a different level of clientele and actually attracting clients into my business. And authenticity was the same value. I had to look at, oh, if I'm beating the drum of being fully expressed and authentic, how am I holding myself back in my messaging and my marketing, in the boldness of my offers? And I had to look at all those in my authenticity with my with who I was attracting and who I'm for and who I'm not for. All of those are pieces that translate into the core values of who you are and who your business is. And being able to look and assess, like, am I actually embodying the values that I say that I have? Or do I need to have a realignment of the hierarchy of values that I actually have?
I think that's a really tough question for some people to answer, because once we have that set of values, and I think those are really good things. I tend to repeat what my guests say, in my own words, just so I can share what I'm hearing. And so, as people are listening and taking notes, the two big ones that I took out of there is, one, discover your values, and two, you got to take ownership over it when you're finding clarity. And I love the statement that you said: look at your calendar; it'll show you what your values are. Then, as you're talking about this, you know, really taking ownership over something like that, I think that can be hard for many people if you're in that leadership role, because there's ego in the way. And the reason I say that is because it's like, well, I took the time to come up with all these values and this is what's important for me, and I put it on the wall. And then all of a sudden it's like, now I'm admitting on the other side that maybe that's not the most important thing. So do you think there's some level of admitting failure if that has to happen?
I think it comes back to clarity, of having clarity as to who you are and have it like,
Sure.
if that is truly a value, like let's say courage is a value for your company. If that truly is a value, it should be able to translate both into how you lead, into what customers you attract into your world, and into the processes and SOPs that you have with your team.
Sure.
It needs to translate into all three categories, both and having that clarity. And you are recognizing that in your own leadership, you're not having those courageous conversations. You're not calling people out when they're underperforming. You are not, stepping up in those ways because you're maybe people pleasing or coddling or, oh, I know you didn't finish your deadline, so let me just like get to it so that the project gets done. That is not embodying the value of courage. And so then that's when you get to have a realignment conversation. And this is where vulnerability comes into place of like, hey, remember that time when I stepped in and did your work for you? And so I broke our agreement that is for holding us to the value of courage. I need to remake our agreement and let you know that by me stepping into this next level of courage, by holding us to the standard and value that we agree on as a company is one of our primary values, then this means that I need to have this courageous conversation with you, and that level of underperformance is unacceptable. And so you remake the agreement.
No, and I think I want to, in my own words, share this, because the one thing I'm hearing you say, and I love it. I've done it as a manager. I've done it as a leader in business. I think we do it in relationships. And one of the things I'm hearing from you, and this is so good, and you may not have even picked up on it, is the fact that you have to manage people by agreement. You have to have their buy-in. And I think that's so powerful in leadership roles. And Kimberly, you're just based on our short conversation, like you're one of those people that probably does that naturally, right? You have this conversation, you have the input with somebody, and they say, yes, I'll do that. Well, then somewhere in your mind, you're checking it off going, they said they'd do it. Ching. Right? Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely started when I met my husband. Because prior to that, I was a chronic people pleaser. And like, if you know the Runaway Bride movie, like adapting yourself to fit the relationship, that was how I
Sure.
was in relationships prior to my husband. And my relationship with him, it has been based on the foundation. It's been an experiment for the past 12 years on the foundation of candid, like complete candor, loving candor. And that candor is actually kind, because my husband is 19 years older than I am. And so when we started dating, he was 44 and I was 24. I was very clear I wanted children. That was a non-negotiable. And I told him, I said, if you want to be with me, this is what's gonna be, this is
Here's the
part of the deal.
program, sir.
And he said, yes, with you, I could definitely see having children, because he was previously married long before he met me. And then, in that marriage, they had decided not to have children. And then I said, well, with me, that's non-negotiable. So now we have two beautiful boys. But that
Awesome.
was a space of being radically candid about what I wanted, what I was not willing to settle for. And also it came out of respect for him, because I knew and
Sure.
respected that he was older, because I knew the heartbreak that he had been through with his divorce from his first marriage. I respected him enough to know that his time was a little shorter than like dating some 24-year-old. Like, he had a little less time to mess around. And I didn't
Sure.
want to approach that relationship. And that has been the foundation of how I've started to treat every relationship in my business, of looking at the valuing of my clients' time and the valuing of my team's time, and being able to look and make sure that I am showing respect for the time that they have on this planet. And I think that definitely hit home a little harder when in 2021, I lost 3 family members and 2 family friends while being stuck abroad in Australia and pregnant.
Sorry to hear that.
And I realized how precious time is. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we don't know how much time we have. And I suddenly have such a deep appreciation for those who choose to spend time with me, which I am so grateful for you, Mike, and for your audience, and for the respect for my team, of the time that they're investing into our business, because it's part of their life force energy. It's part of my life force. It's not just my business. It's our business. And when I switched from it being a me business to an our business, that's when I got much more buy-in from the team in being able to say, these are our core values. Do you stand by these? Because that's how I hire. The values are through how I hire as well, to make sure that I'm hiring people. I hire for values first. Any task or management principle can be taught, but values is a character trait, and it's something that has to be developed. And it's not something that I want to spend the time developing in a team member because it takes years for some values. Like ownership, going from victimhood to ownership, that is a value that sometimes takes decades for people to actually fully own.
Sure. And, I was actually having a conversation with somebody just yesterday, and that was one of the things that in our conversation, I commented, I said, yeah, the thing is, I think the best leaders acknowledge someone's character. You look for character, you hire for character and values. You can train skills.
Mm-hmm.
And you've said that in many ways. I think that's extremely valuable. The other thing that I picked up on that you just said was when you move from me to our, right? It's, oh, this is my business to it's our business. Something so simple. We looked at it initially as semantics, right? But I think the reverse is true as well. When you hear employees start referring to it, or team members, or however, I've always said, that I work with people, they don't work for me, if that makes sense. But when they start referring to the business as their business, right? Oh, this is our business. You can immediately tell and see the jump in the level of buy-in. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. And especially if one of your core values is ownership,
Absolutely.
it definitely stands out in the performance of the team.
So I want to shift gears on you here for just a moment. You brought up having some fear and doubt earlier. You mentioned fear and doubt, and you mentioned, I think when you were talking about the context of, hey, I was getting into this coaching business, and you didn't exactly know, you didn't have the clarity and so forth. And I think those are some very powerful words. There's some very powerful emotions. And one of the things that you had mentioned before, when we were getting into talking, is how to deal with negative thoughts and emotions. And so putting yourself in that time, you're somebody that has traversed that trail. You've been through it. Because anyone that is to talk to you right now, it's like, I mean, you're phenomenal. And just the energy that you bring, and the clarity and the confidence. And so I'm curious, what advice would you give to somebody? Where would you start? Because you realize, hey, I've got this negative crazy eight going on, and I'm fearful, or I'm doubtful, or I'm concerned about moving forward. And I know that's a big frame, but where do you start with somebody that is in that position? How do you start to overcome negative thoughts and emotions and the fear and the doubt that creep in business?
Such a great question, Mike. I think the biggest one that I had to overcome was the fact that I had put my success on a pedestal, my previous success on a pedestal. And if you think about it, what a pedestal is, it's a very shaky surface. Like, it's tall, you can knock it over, depending upon how high your ego has and how much pride you have to put it up on that pedestal. And what happens when you put your past successes up on a pedestal is that when starting anything new, it can create new fear and doubt, because it creates that thing that's called an imposter syndrome, which I don't really believe it's a syndrome. I believe you're just starting something new. So of course you don't know. But when you've had previous success and like significant success in other areas, and that success is up on a pedestal, most people are scared to be seen as beginners again. And that's exactly where I was. My fear and doubt was 100% that I would be found out to be a fraud, or that in some way my beginner status in a new business somehow invalidated my previous successes. And I see that consistently with leaders who've had past successes, is they put that success up on a pedestal. And so they don't start with the beginner mindset. And I think the best example is what I'm going through currently, which is I have started writing. Actually, it's already in production, but like, I finished writing a children's fart book. And this is just a pure hobby. This is just for fun. My son, when he was born, almost 7 years ago, oh my goodness. But he was scared of his own farts. And so I wrote him a little poem book and I'm getting it illustrated, producing it. I know nothing about the publishing world, like nothing. I know nothing about board books or children's books. That's not my industry. It's not my game. So what's very different about how I'm approaching it is I have no pride or ego going in and asking my illustrator, asking my formatter, asking the printer, like a bajillion questions to look stupid, because I don't care about looking stupid. I'm new. But the problem is especially if you've like where I was back in 2015, is I had already had a successful e-commerce business, and I didn't want to be perceived as new in a new industry. And that's where most of my fear was I was scared to ask questions, ask for help, seek counsel, seek people who could provide me with greater clarity, because I was scared of them looking at me and thinking I was stupid or in some way invalidating my past successes. And I've seen that consistently with business owners when they're first starting out, and that first initial ask for help, especially, when they've established themselves as a very successful business owner in multiple areas, that first initial ask for help, it can feel like a tough one when I had a very successful client, super successful, number one in his industry. And when he asked me for support, it was like, I think I might need a little help with my performance and as a leader. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, we happy to have that conversation. It was actually someone I met on a podcast. But that experience was like, he was very unsure of like just the support of being able to be in that space, because there's a level of consciousness. The first level of consciousness is a to me consciousness, which is a victim consciousness. Most people's consciousness is in a by me consciousness, and that's where most people come to me, where they're in a space of like, I have to do everything myself. I'm the self-made millionaire. I'm the self-made this. And that it creates an internal environment of pressure that prevents you from actually receiving support and gaining greater clarity to move you forward faster in your decision making, because you're scared of what other people will think of you if you start asking more questions. And that's where a lot of people come to me. The next layer of consciousness is for me, where people start to see everything is happening for them. And so asking questions no longer becomes a barrier. It's that even if that person considers me to be stupid, that's only a reflection of how I perceive myself. So that's something that I get to heal and work on within myself rather than it. And so that that interaction happen for me and for my growth and personal benefit, rather than it being something that, was by me. So when you're in that space of fear and doubt, check on one, if are you trying to do everything yourself? Two, are you scared of being wrong or scared of not being right? That's a huge one I see with leaders.
Sure.
And three, where are you trying to control?
No, I love that. So the to me, by me, for me. I love that formula. Is there one that comes after that, or
Yeah.
is that the whole picture? So
And
can
then
you frame that
through
up for me?
me. Yeah. So
Through me.
then it's through me. So everything happens through me. And then the last one is as me. And so that's where you basically understand that you are the creator of your circumstances, co-create your create through me is really there is a consciousness that you're creating with the divine source, something beyond you, and you are co-creating this reality. And then the final stage of consciousness is as me.
No, I love that. I've speaking very frankly, I haven't heard it laid out that way before. And I don't know if that's a common thing and I've just missed it, but I love the, done to me, done by me, done for me, done through me. And then and then you said as me as the last one. And
Mhm.
so I think it's easy. Man, I'm just thinking about times in my own career and my own success. There are so many times, especially, the type A personality, hands-on leader, you get stuck in step two of that, man. And because it's like,
Mhm.
oh, everything's got to be done by me. Oh, no. Hey, you know, person, could you do this for me? And they're like, yeah, I can do it, but they're not moving fast enough. You're like, get out of the way. I got this. Right. Man, I've been so trapped there. And the other thing that you said, when you're talking about overcoming fear, and this is why I just love these conversations, because I will tell you, Kimberly, like I get so much out of it, and I just know my audience will as well. When I took on another role recently, moved into a role as a general sales manager for an organization, and I've been doing digital marketing. I've been in the automotive sector for over 20 years, and so it's one of those things like what you know, right? And I said, okay, I'll take on this other role, kind of see if I still got it. And I got it. Well, then as some time went on, I had someone that specifically asked me, hey, we need you to come back into this digital marketing space because a couple of the companies that we'd been using were failing. And so I thought to myself, well, crap, what if it's just the economy? What if I can't do it? Right? Yeah. I mean, you start to question yourself, and you start to make up these things that just aren't even true. They have no semblance of the truth.
Mhm.
So, um,
The stories we can make up are fantastic, like real, like positively Hollywood and cinematic.
absolutely.
But
Well,
when you recognize the storytelling structure of like there's only 7 story archetypes that humans identify with, and our
okay.
unconscious mind um, seeks familiarity, right? So it's always
Mhm.
looking for familiar patterns. And so when you can start identifying, oh, that's just an overcoming the monster story, or that's just a rags to riches story that I have because my unconscious mind wants to frame it in this like archetype of a story. And when you can see that, then you can look at what is the monster you need to overcome, or what is the rag story, or the quest that you need to set out on to solve the problem. You get through your stories a lot faster when you recognize what archetype they're falling into.
No, I love that. Let me ask you a question, because so much we've talked about. We've talked a lot of your successes, and like I said, the things that you've done. You've been a TEDx speaker and the founder of 2 businesses. And for me, my wife is a stay-at-home mom. We have 3 kids. I think that's such a powerful. You being a mom that's one of the most powerful and fulfilling jobs. Me being a dad, likewise, right? Just in our lives. I'm curious, can you think of a time, and I love the fact you have so many great answers and just so much awesome experience. Can you think of a time once you've been in these businesses that you really struggled or failed at something, and how did you overcome that? What method did you use to say, hey,
Mm.
okay, this thing I hit a wall. And the reason I asked this question, I'll give you a second to think while I'm yammering on. The reason I ask the question is because I think so often in leadership and with entrepreneurs and CEOs, people in business, we over embrace our failures and we get stuck there. And I think if we can hear from other people such as yourself that have had such tremendous success and how you maybe overcame something like that, it's often helpful for others to see, you know, their humanity and how they can overcome it too. So can you think of a specific, hey, here's this brick wall or this quote unquote failure. I don't want to frame it as a failure for you. And then how did you overcome that?
So a big one was in 2018. My business was starting to take off. I also was a new mom, and I had a beautiful baby. And like we mentioned, our unconscious stories started to come
Mm-hmm.
up. And I was raised by two entrepreneurial parents, and I watched my parents grow a company from zero to $1 million annual revenue business within the span of 30 years, while my dad was a highly functioning addict. And it wasn't until the last few years that I was involved with their business, helping them with the marketing, that we hit that $1 million annual revenue. And that was also the time when my dad got sober. But growing up, there was a story that I had perceived and picked up, which, you know, may be true. I've asked my mom and she's like, no, I never thought that about your father. But I thought she thought that about my father, which I then projected into my relationship with my husband after my son was born. And it was of that by me consciousness. It was, I was suddenly making more money than my husband. I was, which hadn't been for the past couple of years. And so suddenly I was like, oh my gosh, here I am, you know, making all the money and I'm taking care of the baby and all this. And I had this whole story about how I was doing everything. And my husband, who is the most amazing, generous man who will stop everything he's doing if I ask him for help. I was living in this story that was based on a paradigm and an old story that I'd unconsciously created when I was a little girl of how I'm doing everything and everything's happening by me versus asking for support from my spouse. And that caused so much friction in my relationship and in my marriage until I had to call myself out on my own BS story. And I remember the moment when I was literally rocking our son down for his nap. And I was like, why am I doing this? Like, my husband loves putting our son down. I knew I had a project to complete. I was like, I know I'm going to cuddle my son and put him down for sleep later on at night. Why don't I ask him? And I realized this whole BS story that I'd created about how it was a by me consciousness story of how I had to do everything and be the be all and end all and couldn't receive that support. And I immediately, my son wasn't yet asleep. So I immediately got up and apologized to my husband. And I was like, I realized, like, I've been projecting this whole story onto you and I'm so sorry. He's like, Kim, you know, if you need anything, like, you just have to ask. And I was like, yeah, I know. I recognize that now. And so I got to move into that consciousness of everything happening by me into everything happening for me, and seeing how my husband is my greatest support for me and being able to leverage and use that support. But it wouldn't have happened had I not had the introspection and self-awareness, and also coaching at the time from my coach at that time to kind of guide me as to seeing, like, why I was choosing to see, because everything in our perspective is an unconscious choice that we're choosing to see, why I was choosing to see my husband in this negative light, and how I could actually shift that and how that was serving me at the time, because we choose our perceptions because they keep us safe, they keep us in control, or they keep us getting some form of approval or like commiseration, as I call it. Totally made up a word, but it's co-misery. It's where, you know, you get that. You say, for example, if you get a compliment and you're like, oh, this old thing, I really do need to lose 5 more pounds. And they're like, oh, girl, you look so good. So it's that sort of like, or oh, yeah, he doesn't deserve you, or things like that, that co-misery that we can create. So those are what I call the 3 Trojan horses of our unconscious mind, which are safety, control, and our desire for validation from others, which creates co-misery. But those 3, when I looked at how I was staying in this familiar box because it was a story that I'd created from when I was young.
Sure.
That changed everything, and it changed the dynamic of our relationship. It also changed my relationship with my business, because suddenly I was like, why am I not asking for more support from my team? Like, and those beliefs, when you have that by me consciousness, it really, when you feel overwhelmed, recognize that you're putting yourself in your own prison, and you have also the power to, and you totally have the key to unlock yourself out if you just choose to.
No, I love that. And I think, as I'm taken away, because I can think of the times in my own career and as a leader, for anybody that's listening to this, if you're watching this, listening to the episode, if you know someone that needs to hear something like this, it's okay. And you're going to have so much opportunity for growth if you ask for help. The key is asking from the right people. One of the things I picked up on too, and actually before we get too much further, I'm going to flash this on the screen again. I have to stop myself. I know it's like really awkward, but just for those of you that are watching or listening to the episode, I would definitely say make sure you connect with Kimberly. You can go to crownyourself.com and connect with her there. Also on LinkedIn, I have her LinkedIn there. It's linkedin.com/in/Kimberly Spencer crown yourself. I do the same thing. I got my brand in my social links there. And then certainly if you're somebody that's wanting to connect and you're looking and you're saying, hey, I'm in this leadership role and I need more visibility. I want to get on podcasts and so forth, because that's one of your jams for sure. You can go to communicationqueens.com. And I want to expand on that right now. I have two questions. Actually, before I go off on this tangent, the one thing that I picked up from that last piece, when you were talking about back in 2018, you said, and my coach at the time. So you're a badass. And I say that like just from the time that we've sat and talked, and for anybody that does any amount of research on you, they're going to go, well, Kimberly, she's awesome. Right. Yet you still said, yet my coach at the time. And so you have coaches and mentors. How important do you think coaches and mentors are in one's life to grow?
I think it is a twofold level of importance. On the one hand, I think coaches are incredibly important for growth, for personal development. I think masterminds are essential. You are most like the 5 people you spend the most time with. That's why I love doing podcasts, because listening to podcasts like yours, Mike, like, people are choosing to surround themselves and up level their circle, even though they may not like have personally interacted with me or you. Like, there's a level of intimacy with podcasting where you can up level your circle just by the podcast you listen to. Coaching is incredibly valuable for seasons in your life. I think one of the greatest compliments that I've had as a coach is in how I coach. It is that I work with people in a way that up levels their life, and then they learn the tools to sustain at that level. And then when they want to grow again, they come back to me. But there is a model in coaching that I very much vehemently disagree with, which is codependent, where it's the continual perception of need that you always need to have a coach, you always need to be personally developing, because the opposite of the flip side of the coin to personal development is personal acceptance. And I think when we come to a place where we can also personally accept who we are in this moment is exactly enough for where we want to be, that changes the game for our relationship with personal development. Because sometimes people approach personal development and coaching from a place of, I need to fix this, or I need to improve this. And there's nothing wrong with personal growth. I am a growth nerd. I've been a personal development junkie for forever. And there also comes a level of personal acceptance. So I recently did a podcast on my podcast, Crown Yourself, about how this year I have chosen, unless it is a specific thing that I want to accomplish in my business, that I have chosen not to receive like generic coaching on my life at this moment, because I'm currently working with learning how to trust my intuition and my higher self as far as guidance, and learning how to tap into that inner voice within. And so, yes to coaching. I think it's a total yes and paradox of being able to say, yes, if you are in a space where you need support, go receive that support. And don't put the power outside of yourself and onto the coach to be the only person supporting you. You got to learn how to back yourself. And a coach who's an excellent coach should be able to guide you to learn how to trust yourself and your own intuition and your own internal guidance system and your own way that you make decisions, and also be able to unlock those paths that can up level you as well.
I love that answer. And it puts me back in this place I shared, gosh, years ago. And like all my kids are in youth sports. And I remember, like I'm a good football dad. My wife and I are good football parents. Our oldest son played football. And I remember doing a show or a blog, and we were talking about, the coaches there, and you watch some coaches, just in the analogy, and you're talking about, okay, they coach, and then you should go figure your own thing out, and then you come back to the coach. And the analogy is sort of like in the football game, right? The coach isn't in the huddle. They're supposed to be there to coach you in practice. They're supposed to be able to coach you on the sidelines, but ultimately, once you're in the game, you're in the throes of it, you got to make the plays yourself. And so I, like, as you're saying that, that's where my brain goes of, okay, well, yeah, I got to take that ownership, and I have to go for it and run with it. So I absolutely adore that response. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, so so shifting gears now a little bit, because I just brought up and I just touched on, and I know you and I talked a little bit beforehand. I want to make sure and cover this part. Communication Queens. So communicationqueens.com, and it does podcast guesting. And when we were talking about, for people needing to be more visible and being able to communicate better and so forth, and two of the specific, and I know we've surrounded a lot of the conversation with this of, communication's important and being visible in leadership and so forth. How important in business, in leadership, in life are those two things, communication and visibility?
Well, communication is everything, because you're communicating with yourself internally, for one. That's where the fears and doubts can come up, and that's where also the elevated communication of the inner champion. And also you're communicating externally with your customers, with your team, with your service providers, with your partners, with your investors. Your communication is it is honestly part of life, and it's part of how we commune and build community to rally people into our kingdom or our queendom, and into the community that is based on the foundation of our values. So unless we're communicating what those values are, unless we're actively putting it forth and calling people out, it's just like, if you think of a sovereign of a country, right?
Mm-hmm.
They are actively saying what they stand for. They're saying what they don't stand for. And so those who are like, oh yeah, I really like that, I feel like, visiting that country, they're going to come and visit. Maybe they even stay for a while. Maybe they even, become a citizen. But that is the model that comes. It wouldn't happen if leaders didn't communicate the values of that country or that business.
And how about visibility? Because I think that's something that's important, and that's one of the things you're doing in Communication Queens, mm-hmm. is you're helping people to be more visible. What is the value in that?
Well, if you think about it, like a leader who is not out front, who's not, and I hear this from people who are like, but I'm an introvert. And I'm like, that's great. That's that's how you like to process information. That mm-hmm. doesn't necessarily mean that you can't be outwardly talking to people. And I also say podcasting is like the introvert's like game changer modality for conversation, because typically sure. most introverts, they like to have a one-on-one conversation versus being in a crowd of people. What better than a podcast interview? So the visibility factor, though, for a leader, you're thus demonstrating by embodiment and example. So you're able to communicate the values, you're able to attract new people into your world, and you also are embodying the principles and the values of which you preach. Ideally, those are sure. our clients that we work with, are the ones who embody it. But ideally, you are that representative that creates the magnetism for people to want to come to your business or your industry, or even just be attracted to you and your brand as a personal brand and leader.
Well, I love that. I complimented you beforehand I always connect with the people that are coming on my podcast 5, 10, 15 minutes beforehand. And right from the get-go, it was fantastic. And I'm going to share part of this conversation. I'm assuming you're okay with that.
Okay.
As we get on, and Kimberly asked me, she goes, "Well, tell me about your audience. Who are they?" And so I walked through that, and I said, and I complimented you. I said, it's interesting. Normally we go on and we're always, the people I'm interviewing are sharing just solely from what their perspective is. Hey, we're here and we're going outward because, and I thought that was a really good and unique question. The fact that you had a genuine interest in me and who the audience is that I share with, and like that to me was really good communication. I knew right from the jump that, okay, well, this is going to be a great conversation because you cared certainly about, how you're presented, your business is presented, your values and your brand as we have this conversation on the podcast. But it's also, I have to imagine, you correct me if I'm wrong, like the framework that's going through your head is, okay, well, how can I take this piece of me and frame it up so that it fits this audience in this group?
Yeah, and the piece of adding value
Mm-hmm.
and serving, like as a leader, how do you go in? If I was to go in with the expectation of like, oh, look at me, look at how amazing I am, yes, sing my praises. Well, that's not, I mean, that might attract some people, but it's not the people that I really want to attract.
Sure.
Versus if I go in with a heart of service and being able to lead from that perspective of
Mm-hmm.
what is it that your audience actually needs. And I think that that's for any form of communication. You want, for any influential relationship, you want to understand the other party's ambition. Where is it that their audience wants to go? Where is it that your team wants to go? What is the ambition that they are seeking, and what is the current affect or the current tone of like and their attitude as far as where they're at in their life and in their world. Without that, you don't have influence. You can't stoke somebody's ambition if you don't know what it is. And so by being able to understand where an audience is, or where your team member is, or where your
Right.
potential customer is, you can't stoke them to where they want to be if you don't know where they are already. It comes back to that point of like, what is that where are we starting? We have to know the common ground so that we can move forward together versus, let me just come on and show you how awesome I am. I think leading from that place of service is that's how you create influential conversations.
I really like that answer as well. And I think, to frame it just a step further, when you're saying, hey, what does the audience need? I think it's important for, if you are somebody that has influence, be it a creator, a leader, a manager, an entrepreneur, a parent with your kids, you should have influence, right? I think it's important to ask that question. When you're saying, what does the audience need? The next step too is, who is the audience?
Mhm.
And you expanded on that. You said, like, who is the customer? Who's the employee? Who's the kid that needs influence from their parent, right? Who is it that I'm talking to right now? I think that's so very valuable. So we're coming up to just about an hour, Kimberly. I mean, I could keep going on and talking with you forever. Just, you have such great insight and such great wisdom when it comes to uh, just leadership and people and communication in general. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Um, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share before I take us out here today?
Yeah, I think I would say that I love, Mike, that you brought up parenting and leadership as well, because the best place to practice it is with your kids. And look at how and I've had this with many clients where they find that they're an excellent leader in their business. They're constantly evolving, but with kids, somehow they become a dictator. And it's do this or no, here's your consequences. And when you can look at how you can take the same type of leadership as how you're successfully leading your team, or vice versa,
Mhm.
maybe you're successfully leading your children and your team is struggling. You can map across the strategies that are working in one area of leadership and have them work for your family and have them work for your relationship with your spouse, so that and have them work for your relationship with yourself. So you are
Sure.
successfully leading in every area of your life. And those skill sets, those strategies, they are applicable in every role. So I love that you brought that up, Mike. And I just wanted to double down on that point For those
Thank you.
who are looking to expand on their leadership or maybe practice it a little bit more, they're seeing that maybe it's lacking in one area. Look at where you're successful in another. What are you doing differently? How are you thinking about your leadership in that area that you're doing successfully? And then just apply those same strategies. You've already got it within you.
I love that. Thank you for those thoughts, because you've had so many phenomenal answers, as I mentioned. So, ladies and gentlemen, Kimberly Spencer, thank you for joining me today on the Leadership Toolkit. If you would do me a favor and just hang out for a second in the quote unquote green room, and
You got it.
I'll take us out right there. So, ladies and gentlemen, what an amazing show. As I mentioned before, make sure and check out Kimberly's site. She's got crownyourself.com. She's got communicationqueens.com. You can connect with her on LinkedIn. I'll have that information on the show notes. Just what a wealth of knowledge, and just a various topics on leadership and business and overcoming fear and really being able to connect with and communicate with people. So I would encourage you, do me a favor. One of the ways this podcast grows is if certainly, throw some thumbs up on it. Please leave some comments and your thoughts. One of the best things that you can do, if you know someone that needs to hear this message that Kimberly shared today, and I'm sure you do, maybe it's you, but maybe you have somebody in your circle that could use her wisdom and insight, I would appreciate if you'd please share the show. Thank you so much. I really value your time. So I hope you gained a lot out of this today. And until we speak next Wednesday, I hope you have an absolutely fantastic day, fantastic week. We'll talk soon, and stay great.